Well, welcome to our webinar today. This is Greg Fossen, founder of XMedia Research. Welcome to another fabulous webinar in our webinar series produced by XMedia Research and nScreenMedia. Today, we are asking a rather unorthodox or somewhat paradoxical question: is good business sense killing your OTT service? So if that sounds like a loaded question, it might be. But here to answer that question are Gene Hoffman, CEO of Vindicia. We've got Bob Terzotis, Executive VP for Mather Economics. And as always, we have moderator extraordinaire Colin Dixon, who's the founder of nScreenMedia. And without further ado, because we've got a lot of material that we want to get covered today, I turn over the time to Colin to introduce the topic, set the issues, give us the data, and he'll bring in Gene and Bob to give their insights throughout the show. So enjoy the webinar. Have a good listen. Remember, you can ask questions throughout the webinar on using your interface. We will get them and we'll address them as soon as possible. But don't panic if we don't get to them right away. We'll have some Q&A at the end and we'll try to address all the questions. So keep them coming and enjoy the webinar. Colin, over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Greg, and welcome everybody. I'm really looking forward to this morning's discussion. Gene Hoffman I've known for quite some time, and any of you that spend any time at my site have possibly even seen interviews with Gene on my site. But Bob Terzotis is, well, he's an economics egghead, so hopefully we're going to learn lots from him as well this morning. But you know, before we get started, what I'd really like to do is have both Gene and Bob quickly introduce their companies in case you haven't heard of them. So Gene, why don't you quickly introduce Vindicia?
Sure, thank you, Colin. Vindicia is a scaled subscription billing infrastructure company that supports the infrastructure for customers like LifeLock, NBA League Pass, the BBC, Telstra, Motley Fool, all sorts of different, very large, generally consumer-facing subscription services.
Thank you very much. And Bob, would you like to tell us about Mather?
Absolutely. We're an economics firm based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and we provide econometric modeling and predictive analysis for our clients so they can have a one-to-one pricing relationship with subscribers, engaged users, and advertisers. We really handle a wide variety of their needs. We take the holistic approach to pricing that allows clients to maximize revenue yield while developing their future strategies, and we work with more than 500 media-based clients on their subscription pricing needs.
Wow, 500. That's a lot. So I'm sure that experience is going to come in very useful for us this morning. Before we actually dive into our some of our major points, I wanted to sort of level set here so that we're just clear on where we are with SVOD services right now. And SVOD subscription VOD is going to absorb the majority of our conversation time this morning. So where are we? Well, penetration in the US is about 55%. Of course, we know it's dominated by Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, although I have to say, HBO now is catching up pretty quickly. About 4.1% of consumers in the US have access to or use HBO Now today. But as you can see, there's a big drop-off. When you get below those top 3 or 4 providers, it gets pretty small pretty quickly. And what this is actually doing is giving rise to a whole new approach, and that is these aggregation services. Companies that have deep penetration in some markets are leveraging that penetration to actually help to sell other complementary SVOD services, and a couple of those are out there: Amazon Streaming Partners Program and a brand new one called Verve, which will be launching later in the year, and that's really focused on the fandom world, the group of anime and convention goers for Star Trek and stuff like that. That's really the group that they're focused on. Huge expansion over the last year, tracking over 100 services now available. They are covering a wide swath of content types. So there's just a selection, Curiosity Stream, which is science and factual, Broadway HD, New York Theatre. Yes, you can watch your theatre from your family room these days. Viki, one you may not have heard of, which is focused on Korean content, but also has Bollywood and other international content. Gaia, some of you may be doing your yoga to Gaia. It's a fitness program, fitness application. And there's Dove Channel, which is family-friendly fun at $4.99. And I can tell you, I'm expecting a lot more of these services to launch in the next year. Now, we have some boundaries already set on how these services are approaching their customers, and we'll be talking a lot more about those boundaries as we go through this morning. Really, the premium brands named video services like HBO Now and Netflix are setting the tone, and we know what it is. The upper boundary for these services seems to be in the $15 range. Most are sitting in the $10 range, and some are down at even as low as 99 cents a month. And as you will hear later, that could be a really big problem for them. Now, typically people provide 1 month commitment free memberships. So, when you subscribe, you're only ever committed to 1 month. Usually you get a free trial period between a week and a month. Netflix, it's a week, and Netflix, it's a month, and Stars, it's a week, but you usually get this free trial period. And the bottom line here is consumers are never on the hook for more than a month. Why? Well, the objective for these services is to lower the barrier to entry, make it as easy as possible for people to sign up. And that's why you have seen us sort of gravitate to these being the dimensions of how the services are offered to consumers. Now, I wanted to highlight just a couple of challenges before we get into the real meat of things here. And there are many, many challenges, some of which we'll be talking to going forward. But I think probably one of the biggest ones is what I call dip in, dip out behavior. Some people call this churn, but I really don't like to use churn in the context of SVOD because I don't think it's a very good fit. 31% have cancelled SVOD services since they've been around, and about the smaller you are, it's the more likely people will cancel. So 30% of Netflix subscribers say they have cancelled at some point. But 40% of Amazon, 42% of Hulu, and it could get even higher than that amongst the smaller providers. And 50% of the people that cancelled resubscribed later. So what this is this dip in, dip out behavior. People join, they watch, and then they leave, and then they come back again when something new happens. This is becoming, I think, a very common behavior, and I think Gene and Bob will have some very specific things to say about that behavior as we go through this morning. Another challenge, platform fees. If you want to deliver on TV, and most of these premium SVOD services do want to deliver on TV, if people sign up through the Apple or Google platform, Google wants 30% of these subscription fees. And, that really puts SVOD services in a very awkward position. They have to explain different pricing to their customers. Some have actually raised their prices by 30% if you sign up through those platforms. And others have just barred, you cannot sign up through that platform. For example, Sling TV, which is just appearing on Apple TV, you actually can't sign up for Sling TV on the Apple platform. You have to sign up somewhere else. And the bottom line here is it's just impossible to absorb these huge fees, just impossible for the services. So those are a couple of the challenges. But let's get our experts involved here. I think you've heard it quite enough from me. So I want to kick us off. Gene, why don't you lead off with a really interesting topic. You say you shouldn't train your customers to steal content. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, this is a very historical observation. We've had these situations through mass transformation, and I came out of the music industry, co-founding eMusic, where what happened was, for fear, for channel conflicts, for all sorts of reasons, people were hesitant to actually give the consumer what they wanted. And what the problem with that was is that the consumer is relatively empowered by technology, so the consumers kind of get what they want regardless. And moving forward, it's been better. If you compare like the transition of music to digital music compared to the kind of transition of television to digital television, at least the consumer today, when they think about, hey, I want to watch this show, goes, is it on Netflix? No. Is it on Amazon? No. Is it on Hulu? No. Well, now I guess I'm going to BitTorrent, right? So that's better. But the problem still lives in, things like territory. You have folks saying, I'm going to release a show in this territory, and they're not going to be able to watch it in these other territories for 6 weeks, 6 months. And if that show is, in demand, if it's Game of Thrones quality or it's Sherlock from BBC, what you're doing fundamentally is telling your consumer, yeah, I know you want to pay for it, but I'm not going to let you. And in fact, what I'm going to do is train you on how exactly to find that show minutes after it's aired in a, shall we say, seedy dark alley in the internet.
Indeed, and I think that's something that the content providers are just simply not very happy about. So Bob, let me bring you in here. What can people do to fight this problem?
So, I saw an interview with Gene back in November of 2015 from London, and he made some very good, strong points. And I think he suggests, rightfully so, that you've got to leverage people's desire to get that content, and they will pay a premium. And I think it's all about how do you determine what that price point should be, and then when to bring the price down as demand changes and availability changes. And so, from our perspective, a kind of a price skimming technique is a good strategy, because you don't want to guess what that price point is. You don't want to guess at 2x or 3x or something else. You want to consider, modeling in a way that allows you to predict the response rates and where to make that starting price point so that it makes sense. And then, to meet your financial expectations, and you definitely don't want to leave money on the table, and you don't want to miss your profit mark. So if you take that kind of approach and you support it with A/B testing, you're going to be able to quickly identify the results and make adjustments so that your path to profitability and maintaining the margin you need is really right there as the demand changes.
So could you just explain what do you mean by skimming pricing? What's that?
So as the availability, as you can see from this chart, you see that if the content if you make it available and the number of people who are willing to pay at a certain price point is a much higher price point is very small, well, then you have to make sure that that price is effective to meet your financial model. And then as you begin to make it available to a higher degree, you would want to bring the price down so that you continue to grow the number of people with that content until you arrive at the final price once it's open in the entire market.
Okay, got it. Now Gene, this sounds kind of crazy. Will people really pay higher prices in regions for this content?
I absolutely believe they will. And, there's a bunch of different dynamics here that are really critically important because, first of all, there's the moral argument with your favorite fan. Like, let's start about who we're talking about, right? This is someone motivated to know that this show comes out at this exact minute, British Standard Time, right? So, we're talking about the most interested, most engaged, probably the least price sensitive consumer of your content that we're talking about. And it's interesting, this gets into the VPN conversation, people getting around restrictions on regionality by, being a European, getting a US VPN IP address and getting US Netflix instead. And I had a really interesting conversation on Twitter about exactly all of this because, a CTO of a major media company was sitting there saying, but I've got these contractual restrictions. And, the answer to the contractual restrictions isn't to throw your hands up and go, well, I'm just going to kind of tough luck, Mr. Customer. It's instead go back to the person you got that contractual restriction with and go, look, you're going to make this available, say, in your region for, part of a $9.99 subscription service. How about I charge $40 a view, and I'll give you a third of it for anybody who wants it right now in this window, right? It's actually an opportunity from a business perspective to say, look, I'm going to try to offer something that might even look not very scalable as a business model to the consumer, but what you fundamentally shift is now the consumer is making a choice to go, well, I could pay for it or steal it. Very different conversation from I can't watch it at all, so I'm going to steal it.
Right, and so that's looking at your graph there, it seems like scarcity definitely gives us a lot of flexibility. So it seems like your graph suggests that we can do what Gene says here in regions where that content isn't available legally, right?
Absolutely, and the great thing is once you've modeled it the first time, then you're able to view actual results, and then it tightens your model for future opportunities, whether it's geography or device type or whatever.
Indeed,
whatever that restriction is.
Right, right, and I mean one thing that we're seeing in the market right now is we're seeing a move towards content aggregators like Netflix, for example, trying to get global licensing so that we reduce this problem. But I gotta tell you, it doesn't seem to be catching on. It doesn't seem to be gaining much traction, certainly not within Hollywood. So it looks like we could be dealing with these unbalances, if you like, of delivery of content for quite some time, wouldn't you say, Gene?
I would, and I think it's actually somewhat bound up in the reason that both Amazon and Netflix have started to look to the fact that they have massive cash piles and massive cash flow and can generate that content initially, and that comes with a worldwide license. And all of a sudden, they're able to go behave in the way that traditional older line media companies are scared to behave or have kind of gotten acculturated to. I mean, some of this was that, we got used to launching a show in the United States and then we syndicated it in a different window and that was half of our revenue. And my God, what will we do with that? And it's like, what you will do is basically make that half of the revenue go away if you continue the current model. So, I think it is very interesting to watch the new content creation by these services because it comes with that bundled global right.
Indeed, and the funny thing is, I've noticed that even for a company like Netflix, which is doing global releases for its content now, its content still does show up on the pirate sites, but it seems to be much less trafficked. Those people, I think you seem to have a compelling reason to subscribe and stay subscribed. So if you've got access to that stuff through Netflix, why? There simply is no reason whatsoever to pirate it, right?
Well, there's one small one, and that is the ownership model. Today it's hard to watch Netflix on a plane, right? Maybe that fixes itself as you start to see, 30 megabit broadband in the air. But, fundamentally, if you're a New Yorker, subways have no connectivity at times. There's all sorts of use cases that, the ownership model may or may not have. Now, historically, video has not been a strong ownership model in the way like other things have, but at the same time, very recently, the DVD and VHS phenomena, I think, surprised Hollywood. So I think there's some of that left when you talk about pirating it. There's no way to know that forever without continuing to subscribe to watch House of Cards.
Right, indeed, and another thing, of course, we're seeing is some companies are now allowing downloads. So, for example, Amazon, there's a small service called Viki, which is a Korean service, which for an additional payment per month you can download. So that sort of fixes the portability issue there as well. But boy, that's a real surprise that you believe that there is a substantial opportunity to charge a lot more, like $40 for a movie rental, is a lot of money. So that's an interesting opportunity that I think hopefully our folks in our audience are thinking very hard about taking advantage of. But how about, we talked a little bit about pricing, but there are some really dangerous side to the pricing equation, right, Gene? You talk about standard pricing can wipe out your profits. What's that about?
Yeah, this is stepping back a little bit from just even SVOD, but it has application, as you were talking about earlier, to some of the SVOD price points. The fundamental issues you get into here are we using a recourse payment method or a non-recourse payment method? And fancy term.
What? Yeah. What
Recourse,
is
yeah, right, exactly.
What is it?
A recourse payment method since the 60s, credit cards have had the ability by law and then also by custom that you can call up the credit card company and go, I didn't like that transaction with this Macy's, right? And you'd get your money back. And so you were protected from a bad merchant completely. Versus if you walked up and paid cash to some dude on the street, and it turns out that you thought you were buying a designer bag and that bag was completely counterfeit, your only recourse is to find the guy. And then it's not even clear he's going to pay you back, right? So, the internet has evolved on a recourse payment system. It has evolved on top of the credit card and debit card rails. Even the services that aren't directly credit card and debit card generally were loaded by credit card and debit card. PayPal, an iTunes store card. Sometimes that's happening on cashback at a Walmart or at a grocery store, but that's kind of the rare version. And so there's a big kind of desire by content owners, especially media companies, to look at this and go, well, why can't I charge $1.99 or 99 cents and have a business model for it? And you build the business model, you look at it, and it doesn't look completely crazy. You're like, okay, yeah, I get that like 5% is going to go to the credit card company, which seems high down here, but okay, I can handle that and go with it because my cost of goods is relatively low. But the problem is as soon as you model in a single chargeback, all of a sudden this model starts to blow up. So let me walk you through that. You've sold 1,000 people a 99-cent video stream, and one of them charges you back. So you're out the 99 cents he paid you, and the $7 to $10 of the cost of the chargeback. So not only does he wipe out his own both revenue and profit, he actually takes out 6 to 8 other people's revenue and profit. It doesn't take a lot of people to all of a sudden take your margin if it's not extremely high and drive it really far towards zero or negative.
So that's pretty scary. I mean, that chargeback is as high as $7 to $10.
Yeah, the underlying network fee is about 5 or 6, and then it's negotiable with the person you're kind of doing your credit card business with, what the rest of that looks like. But no matter what, you got to call it $5 into your model and figure out, the industry standard is somewhere between 0.5 and 0.8% of all your customers will issue a chargeback. But on a dollars basis, when you're talking about a 99-cent transaction, that ends up being a 10 or 15% hit to the gross margin and revenue.
Now that is some scary numbers.
That's right.
Bob, so talk to us a little bit about this issue, this issue of chargebacks and minimum payments and all of that. What can you add here?
Well, I think Gene made some great points, and I think from our perspective, modeling is really what you want to try and understand. When you talked about the gap between what chargebacks can run for a specific company, you really have to understand that, and the creation of kind of that lifetime value calculation where you're factoring in the potential revenues and also those potential expenses that are going to negatively impact the profit, as well as the retention. I don't want to say churn because you clearly told me that that's a word you don't like, although I've got to say it on most of my slides, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time. So
that's okay. That's okay.
In looking at that, what you really want to try and do is to be able to understand once you factor in looking at all the data and all the historical transactions that a particular provider might have, what is going to be that lifetime value calculation, and then you can begin to identify where you can set different price points, or whether it's going to be a price point that you'd set by geography or device type or content to get to that margin that you need in protecting yourself from some of these expenses.
And I put one of your slides up here, which I thought was particularly interesting. You were talking about, that's one thing I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, was where I talked about this dip in, dip out behavior. And here we have a slide from Parks Association, which is really talking about the number of people that have cancelled. How does this impact the revenue flow for the company? What are the impacts here?
So really the pricing strategy that you might want to look at can be different by your position in the market. For example, the top 3 providers, they have such a large footprint, and that their growing total subscribers and penetration is important to their revenue strategy, where smaller startup providers need to focus more on acquisition yield and long-term retention, making their data analytics needs similar but also very different. So picture it this way: viewers of content of smaller providers are more specific in nature with shorter tenure. They tend to have that dip in, dip out behavior. So it necessitates the need to develop acquisition and pricing strategies to get these viewers to engage in more content before moving on, to extend their life cycle before churning, so to speak. So for providers in that type of position, it's important for them to hit the targets with marketing as well as price point, as the larger providers really have the power to push messaging to a larger number of users in a very targeted way, so they can be less accurate and still adequately drive revenues. And smaller providers, they have much smaller learning opportunities, so they have to really be on point with price and marketing messages, so that predictive modeling is really just as important for them as it is for the big 3.
Okay, Gene, you had something?
Yeah, and this actually goes all the way back around to what started this conversation. When you're sitting there talking about offering something up for 99 cents or $1.99, the amount of money you can spend to acquire someone who on average does a $1.99 transaction is pretty darn small. And if you think you're going to be able to use that transaction to leverage into a long customer lifetime, then maybe the customer acquisition cost can add up correctly. But that's the other real peril of these really low-priced kind of models, especially if you don't have that strong sense that you're getting a future, because you might end up having to pay $5 to acquire a $1.99 first transaction, and the reason you would do that is because you then expect them to be customers for the next 2 years and do $40 on average worth of actual business with you.
Yeah, but of course there's no guarantee that will happen, right? Now, talk to us a little bit more about recourse payments. What sort of level of recourse payments should I expect to see amongst my subscribers? How often is that going to happen?
Well, you should absolutely use a rule of thumb of at least 0.5% per month are going to, for whatever reason, claim they didn't do it. And I mean, it gets down to the level of World of Warcraft. We used to manage their chargebacks, and literally in the days before and after Thanksgiving, we would see a massive chargebacks. And what it was college kids clearing their credit limits so they could go Christmas shopping and figuring that they just charged back this month's Warcraft bill. So it's there. It's going to happen.
So they just decided they didn't want to pay.
That's right. They figured that was the thing that would get in least trouble for like getting $20 back and buying their girlfriend a thing, right?
Wow. And I just can't get over it. I mean, for somebody that's charging $1.99 or 99 cents, even lower, it could take you a long time to recover from that, right?
Yeah, it really points to like a $5 kind of minimum transaction when the credit and debit network is underneath.
Yeah.
Actually, I have one thing to add. Those college kids that are clearing $20 off their credit card so they can buy their girlfriend a Christmas gift, they're probably going to lose that girlfriend, and they might just want to stick with the video games, because $20 gift, she is not going to stick around very long.
No, I doubt that very much. This discussion really of the canceling, this dip in, dip out behavior, it reminds me of something that Tim Connolly said last year to INTX. And he talked about how important it was to really think about retention. He and Roger Lynch from Sling TV both agreed that the 3-month threshold was incredibly important. If you can get people past 3 months of memberships, they tended to stick around a lot longer. And Tim Connolly said one other thing that I thought was absolutely fascinating. He said that they noticed that the cancellation rates amongst subscribers that had accessed the system from one other screen, so let's say they signed up through their tablet, if they had accessed through a smart TV or through their PC, those subscribers were significantly less likely to cancel than a subscriber that had only accessed through one screen. And he said they used retargeting methods to actually go in and chase those subscribers to urge them to install on another one of those screens. So I thought that was a pretty interesting comments there from people on the front line, Sling TV and Hulu. And they really, Roger Lynch said one other really interesting thing. He said that they didn't even think about a customer that had unsubscribed as not being a customer anymore. They tended to think of them as customers that were just not paying them anymore. And their objective was, let's use what we know about them to target that customer to bring them back in. And Gene, is there anything else that people can do to remain friendly to these customers when they cancel?
Well, absolutely. It's in fact that you should make it easy to cancel, which is exceedingly counterintuitive. I think you hint on part of this when you say it's not really churn. I challenge you that there is churn. The churn you have is when you behave like Comcast or AOL in the past, and you make it nearly impossible to cancel. And that customer basically says to himself, there is no way I'm going to go through that amount of pain to be able to opt out, even though I might come back. Compare that with making it very easy to leave, and all you're doing is asking for a little bit of information about why they're leaving. If you ask that, you all of a sudden have segmented your departing, temporarily paused customers into the buckets that your marketing team can now go back to and have amazing open rates, amazing click-through rates, and amazing resubscribe rates, because they're able to tailor a message that says, if people left because the content wasn't rich enough, we've added 1,000 new movies, you should come check it back out. It's that kind of behavior where you make it really easy, really upfront, and very customer friendly. And all of a sudden now the customer may be making just an honest economic decision. Lost my job. As soon as I can, I'll be back. But if you made it so hard that you have to call the retention department and the retention department's boss and the used car salesman's manager, this is not a place you come back to spend money.
Yeah, indeed. I noticed I'd tried out the new Stars standalone service, and I actually couldn't figure out how to cancel it. It was, and it made me really think very hard about resubscribing again. But Bob, talk to us a little bit about the economics of this. I mean, it seems like you can't, even when you've got a subscriber, you can't rely on the fact that they're going to stick around a lot for the whole period. So, doesn't this play havoc with your ability to manage your business?
It does, but I think Gene has nailed it so well. I think what we would add to the conversation is to be able to pull every piece of data that you have into that and to do the predictive modeling that'll let you know who is at most at risk for churn, then send that dynamic messaging, the marketing pitch, by understanding the content that they're viewing and what might be coming up, and to be able to push messaging to them in a way that is more than just kind of the white noise that you might see from the typical generic marketing. Once you do that, then who is in your propensity to churn bucket. You push messaging, you test, you adjust, and you move forward, so that the goal, if they're going to leave, is that you can try to extend some of them for a little longer, and then you can learn from the time that you had with them in terms of how to get them back to dip their toe back in the next time.
So that really seems to be an absolutely key theme here. Personalization of the service doesn't end when somebody ceases to be a subscriber. It is a critical tool in winning them back and making them feel like, even though when they're not paying you, making them feel like you're still they're still your customer, that you still care, right? That seems to be critical.
Absolutely. You've got to make sure that you understand that they're just taking a break, but you're there when they're ready to come back, and you're actually encouraging them, whether it's testing maybe a price differential or a different type of service or an alternative to whatever they're doing currently or were doing in the past, and seeing how that that behavior changes them. And maybe if the experience changes, you send them, that kind of a notification, so that maybe they didn't tell you that the experience was the problem. It wasn't the price; it might have been the experience, and you have an opportunity to reconnect that way.
Yeah, it seems like that's one defining difference between OTT services and regular television services. You have an opportunity to really know a tremendous amount about the experience that the customer is having. I know that with Netflix, for example, they use data. They don't even QA their stuff when they put it up anymore. When they put new stuff up to see if it was encoded properly or if it worked properly, they wait and they look at the data, and they can see from people's viewership if there's a problem. So for sure, you will be able to see from the data if there is a quality issue, right, that you should be addressing. So maybe if you notice a lot of people are canceling, you should reach out to your former subscribers and say, hey, we've fixed a lot of problems. It's great. But it also goes beyond that, Gene, right? You can do more than that by going out and saying, well, we noticed that you watched this series. We've got some more episodes, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, when you start to really understand, how customers have interacted and which, fundamentally which customer user journey was the thing that mattered to them, then you have a whole new set of tools. And, I was talking to the head of WWE, and we were having this conversation in LA a couple weeks ago. You go into this when you launch one of these services, and you kind of have this, I think I'm targeting people in this demographic with this kind of racial profile, with this kind of interest set. And you go out and you throw something against the wall, and you find out what your actual, real, long-term subscribers start to look like. The people who get across that 3-month hump. And all of a sudden, you, from the data, come instead from the ground up, and you create those quartiles, and you start looking at it, and you figure out that, like, African Americans over 40 have more to do with white young men at 18 in my audience, and in fact, I reached them from exactly the same place. So my customer journeys were wrong. The data has told me I'm completely nuts. But what the data does tell me is that if I want these best subscribers, these are exactly the attributes that I need to look for out there when I'm doing an ad buy, when I'm spending on media, when I'm doing a partnership to drive traffic from a third-party site.
Indeed, and man, you can even phone more often and make sure you reach them there rather than on another device. So it sounds like there's just tremendous opportunities to do some really innovative things here to win those customers back and keep them sticking around for longer. Now, I wanted to move on. We have a particularly interesting discussion. Gene, we haven't had a chance to talk about this, but you've said in the past that you need to know the difference between good and bad revenue. So what does that mean? How can any revenue be bad?
Yeah, well, so, we were talking about customer lifetime value, right? And I think it's a bit of a shift for a lot of folks to change their mental model from, I'm going to make a movie and try to get butts in the seats and sell plastic, and that's how I make my money. And then maybe views down the road, in syndication. In this world, the issue is, how do I spend my marketing dollar to acquire that subscriber that's going to be here in 36 months? And, there are some really counterintuitive situations you can get into. You can be acquiring 10,000 new subscribers a day on day one, and you go out and you're a big subscription service. You make a change to your national ad buy. You've got new content. It's a different ad, and you go look on day two after you started running that ad, and you got 12,000 new subscribers that day, and you run it enough to know that it's statistically significant amount of new people. Great. Well, generally, you got to wait 3 months, because it may be that the 10,000 people from day one, you'll have 7,000 of them get across the 90-day hurdle. But of the 12,000, only 5,000 of them will get across the 90-day hurdle. And so all of a sudden, all those dollars you're spending, to get supposedly incrementally more subscribers in 36 months, in fact, got you less.
Wow. So what can you do about that?
Well, there's a couple things you can do. I mean, one of them is keeping in mind that in many ways the customer longevity is more interesting than the number of subscribers you can actually get. It goes a little bit back to what I was talking about coming back up from the data of your best subscribers. Don't mean to talk too much about us and Mather, but these are the sorts of things that we're able to give you a lot of insight into, often in faster turnaround times than waiting for that 90th day. Being able to leverage existing subscriber behavior, understanding the models and how they work against household income, the demographics underneath. This is a way for you to be able to make a quick move, because what you don't want to do is keep running that ad buy for 90 days until you figure out that in fact you're acquiring 20% less long-term subscribers than you thought you were. You're going to make those changes. You need to be able to test them. Being able to test how that impacts customer life may be, in fact, more important than looking at exactly how yesterday's new results looked.
Indeed. So Bob, can you talk to us a little bit about this issue as well? This good revenue versus bad revenue.
Sure. I think Gene did a great job talking about the process, and for us, I'll kind of go a little bit of a different route. For us, being able to help identify the attributes of the bad revenue, and really, we're not going to not go after bad revenue, only because we have to fill the pipeline. So you've got the good, which we know that we bring that in. We have the bad, which is really more marginal revenue. So the goal with that is to be able to identify and look at the triggers that can kind of push that bad revenue, or as much of it as possible, to the good revenue bucket. That's a necessity that we have to go after. So for many of our clients, high churning business is that bad revenue, and regardless of the acquisition cost, it requires constant pressure to maintain the revenue pipeline. So it's the quantity versus quality paradigm. So it's a delicate balance, and what we want to do is trying to be proactive in identifying the churn so you can eliminate that where you can from acquisition, but also to help them to identify and establish the best entry price points and step-up strategy or incentives or whatever to move them further along toward the good side of the bucket.
So does that mean that I should take a look at where I'm advertising, because maybe I'm advertising in the wrong places, and that's why I'm getting the wrong people in here, the people that just come in and churn out after a month or something?
Absolutely, you have to understand where the folks are coming from. You have to understand what kind of device type they're using. You have to look at geography, price points, incentives, and then changes in those behaviors as they move through the customer life cycle. And all of those things will allow you to forecast and model and then reposition or adjust with your next campaign.
Indeed. So Gene, any other thoughts here on what we can do to address this good bad revenue issue?
Yeah, some of it is it depends on whether you've got real opportunities for diversified offerings. So, the more broad-based your offering set is, the more, you can drive the different types of revenues, the different types of products. But, when you're a much more pure play, your Hulu, your Netflix, you kind of have an overall business model. And instead of focusing on revenue, what you really want to focus on is, MRR, monthly recurring revenue, in 4 months or 6 months, right? If you're getting the customer that's going to drive more MRR in 6 months, you in fact probably want to take the small revenue hit of not acquiring more customers who you just know are going to churn, because there's a whole host of issues there. You've got is he churning because you're not actually giving him an ROI explanation of what the heck it is that you actually do? It's things like that fall out of this, and when you keep that focus on what do I have to do to make sure that he's a subscriber in 6 months, I think it changes a lot of the metrics you look at and a lot of the focuses you have.
Indeed. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to touch on that have been brought up by questions. The first is I'd like to return to the low payment issue. So I mentioned at the start that there were some services are charging 99 cents or $2.99 or $3.99, and we know that those are dangerous price points because of the recourse payments and the chargebacks and the resulting chargebacks. So what are some of the things that we can do? I mean, there's the obvious thing that we can raise prices. So that's one thing that we can do, but that may have that may increase the price above where people think that there's sufficient value. What else can we do here?
Well, I think there's a couple things you can do. One is the variable that I think you actually have much more control of than people really understand is time. When you sit there saying, I want 99 cents a month, it's actually arguably better to ask for $5 every 6 months or even $8 every 6 months. People don't focus necessarily on the time side of it, but they are price sensitive enough to understand that if you talk time in a different way, that they'll understand it. So I think that's one of the really strong strategies is, move your pricing up into the range where you don't have to worry as much about these kind of price related card network related problems. But the other one is that your price point offered on the front door doesn't necessarily have to be the price that your best customers will end up paying. And a lot of people don't know that Netflix is doing a version of this today. When you think you're signing up for VOD, or SVOD, pardon me, with Netflix, you think, I'm going to pay, I think it's $8.99 right now. I admit I've been a subscriber so long I don't even remember. But everyone knows there's this one price point. But if you have kids and a wife and everybody's playing on Netflix at the same time, you hit the 2-stream limit. And all of a sudden now Netflix explains to you that in fact it's not just $8.99, but you could have 4 streams for a couple bucks more. And it has all these very positive things. It allows you to have the strength of the unity of message of one price to customer acquire, while still actually getting you to, for your best customers, a higher price, a higher annual recurring revenue, a higher annual revenue per user number. And so those are kind of the 2 core tools that I see out there that can be used to manage this price perception problem that I think a lot of people feel in that category of folks who dropped off after Amazon, Hulu, Netflix.
So it seems like you're saying that, I said at the beginning that one of the things that seem to be the ground rules for SVOD is that you only ever have 1 month commitment. But you're saying, I think I hear you saying that's not a hard and fast rule, particularly at the lower end, that people can offer, maybe a small discount if you sign up for 3 or 6 months, right?
Well, I was actually even saying it is bundling it a little differently. In other words, it's not really a commitment. You're saying instead of charging you 99 cents for the next 6 months, I'm just going to charge you $5, and maybe that's a discount, but even $6 for 6 months. I think it's an easier message. I think it's not off. If you've got this sense that people aren't going to have enough content, you're giving them so much time included that it kind of lowers the risk they're not going to find something else worth their time and money. And, when you start pulling this all the way back, a midline show that you're going to own on iTunes or Amazon Digital is like $4 or $5. So, you're back to this other kind of price point that people look at and go, yeah, okay, I'm going to get what I want. I might have paid $5 for just the show I'm looking for anyway. But I'm going to get this catalog and a bunch of time to explore it. Sure.
Very good. So actually, this, one of the things that I think we might be in need of here is a little primer on pricing strategy. Bob, can you help us out?
Absolutely. So, Gene made some good points, but I'll add a couple of things to his last comment. Pricing by content, premium content, or pricing by the amount that a user is engaged. People are willing to pay a little bit more, much like where you can't get the product, you're willing to pay more. Same type of thing. It's a convenience. It's I like what I have. So if I develop a small bundle price, you can move their price up. Gene just said he didn't know what he was paying for Netflix, and I'm embarrassed enough to say the exact same thing. So when that change happens, I get based on my demand and how much I use, and also outside data that we factor into the process, you can make this kind of a non-event for you to help drive that revenue. So now you're talking about this, which price elasticity for us is really the basis of everything that we do on the economic side of pricing. So, we have clients that definitely want to find ways to drive their revenue, and the best way to do that is to understand what the demand looks like and how sensitive they are to price and what potential levers you can pull to drive that number.
Very good. So I want to jump to a question. Somebody's posted a very, very interesting question, and I might be great for us to chat about. And I'm just going to read this. It's thoughts on the often contradictory situation some of the big traditional media companies find themselves in. On one end, trying to protect the very healthy margins that come from the aging traditional models versus trying to compete in a changing environment where they can't really optimize their product to compete effectively in the OTT world without hurting their current business. This, of course, is certainly for the premium providers. This is the name of the game right now. So, what are our thoughts there?
Well, look, there's the realities and there's some better news than there used to be. So, the reality is in any business, when a disruptive upstart technology or company or whatever you want to call it comes into a market, you may not have a choice over whether your margins are going to erode, right? Um, and it just is what it is to some extent. Now, the good news is that we've gotten to a place where broadband penetration, device penetration, and consumer acceptance of a different method of actually consuming is moving much faster. I mean, when you start to look at like device adoption rates or new technology adoption rates, we're in this place where you can go from, WeChat having 0 users to having 1 billion people in a 12, 14-month period. In that environment, we've got this place where the liquidity of the consumer demand is much higher. So there is a much stronger likelihood that you can get to the kinds of revenues and margins that are in fact, if not fully replacement, materially replacing. And I think WWE is a great case study of this. They went out and they were lambasted for basically destroying their pay-per-view business. They said, look, if you subscribe, we'll give you pay-per-view for 1/4 of the price of pay-per-view, but per month. And at first it looked painful, and it took them a little time to kind of understand how to acquire and go through the learning curve. But now I would say it's probably 1/3 to a little higher than that of their total annual revenue, and more than that of their total gross margin. Right, and at the end of the day, profit matters, even though most of us like to read revenue because it's simpler. But it's those opportunities. It's that there is a real opportunity for you to say, hey, look, between a strategy of going global, partnering with folks in niches, I can both be disrupted and be my own disruptor in a way that, for example, the music business never could, and in fact, a lot of software companies couldn't survive as well.
It seems like it's almost trusting the value of the content. Maybe I noticed that companies like Sky and Dish, they seem to have taken the decision that they're going to compete with themselves. So Dish, of course, has launched Sling TV here in the US, and Sky in the UK has launched Now TV. And these are, as it were, different formulations of their traditional service at very, very different price points, and ostensibly targeting a different audience than traditionally uses their satellite services. But notwithstanding that, there's still some risk of cannibalization, right? That when you say?
Yeah, there absolutely is, but the problem is that there's also this both illegitimate and legitimate pricing pressure out there. The illegitimate being piracy, as we've talked about before, because sooner or later customers just go, screw it, it's too expensive, I'm going to go over here, right? You hit the edge of the elasticity. But the positive one is, I think customers look at I bought my internet access, I bought my device, I bought my TV. There's no truck, there's no satellite, there's no all of this infrastructure. I think it probably should cost me a little less to get access to this content than it used to. And I don't think that's off base. Now, the flip side of that, and this goes to what I was saying about the ubiquity and the deployment and install base, the old-fashioned story about selling the same product cheaper is that you sell it to more people and might actually incrementally make more total revenue with more margin.
Right, indeed, and I wanted to. Bob has I think, a really interesting slide here, and this sort of sums it all up. So, Bob, do you wanna talk us through this your holistic approach? It sort of brings it all together, I think.
Yeah, I think all the things that we've talked about this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, really come into play. And Gene just was talking about, if you sold a considerably more people at a lower rate, you can actually make more money. I think right now you're seeing such tremendous growth, and sometimes mistakes in the process can be hidden by that type of growth percentage. So when you look at it, at some point, the natural growth is going to slow, and they're going to have to look for other ways. And usually in businesses, people will take that price up, and being strategic about that will then create opportunities for lower price points for different types of bundled content. And you have some opportunities there to not only gain more revenue from your best, most engaged users, but also from those people who, if you took the price up, would churn more. So I think there's that holistic picture that we have to do. And for what we look at for our clients is creating that complete model where they understand, and we have taken all of the possible data, both online and offline data that we can, to create that picture of what every subscriber or a user looks like in terms of profit and propensity to subscribe and long-term value. And we put that into how do they acquire them, and then how do they retain and grow that revenue from those folks, and then the renewal process so that it can extend that lifetime and that life cycle and the value, and then where are the opportunities to upgrade or add premium content or develop additional revenue streams. And then finally, for those people who do tend to dip in and dip out, how do you reacquire them, and what does that look like, and what timeline, and what offers, and what messaging, and make that as effective as possible, and having the analytics and the data behind that so that it does come full circle.
Indeed, that really does seem to bring us full circle. I just want to let the audience know we're coming to the end now, so if you have any last minute questions, you might want to type them in right now. I have one more question. One of the things that I know some companies have tried is prepaid cards. What are the dynamics affecting the use of prepaying rather than the usual mechanisms?
Well, the prepaid card is an interesting solution potentially, but the problems you face is, again, this customer acquisition cost question kind of turned on its head. For the end user, if you say, hey, look, I'll sell you a $10 card and then you can use it on 25-cent VOD streams, right? Is your entire your entire content catalog broad enough that the customer feels like he's going to have, $10 worth of actual spend there? Today we've gotten this world where if I hand somebody an Amazon stored value card, I am very confident, and they are very confident they can use every single dime of that. And the same thing with Apple, iTunes, Google Play. If you're off in your own walled garden, that's harder. One of our customers, Leapfrog, they've got enough of an environment and ecosystem that they can do that. And grandma will go spend $25 at Toys R Us, load that card, and then they'll redeem it online and get their Dr. Seuss story, right? But when you're just sitting there and you're thinking about it as being a low end offering, I think it doesn't get you past the kind of fundamental problems of it's going to cost X to acquire a customer, and can you and they both expect that the Y value in the future is high enough. With that, that's where I think you go back to saying, well, in that case, you use subscription, you use giving people more time against their subscription, and then you use the power of recurring, right, to really get that long-term ongoing price. And I don't know what I pay Netflix per month, but I know that over the, I think, approaching 13 years that I've been a subscriber, I've paid them what is equivalent to a nice used car.
I suspect it's very much similar for me as well. Well, on that note, I think we're just about out of time. So Bob, Gene, thank you very much for your sage words, and I'm going to hand it back to Greg to close it out.
Well, thanks, Colin. Fantastic job leading us through this discussion today. Again, Gene, Bob, thank you so much for your tremendous insights on this incredibly important topic. And I know I came away learning a lot today, and hope everyone else did. For those of you who stuck with us the whole time, we appreciate you being here with us. To get a recap of the webinar and a video, and also some analysis on some of the discussions we talked about, check back on Monday at nScreenMedia.com, and you'll see the recordings posted there, and some analysis from from Colin on this topic. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a great day. Until next time.